Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1900, and the Holloway Hotel stood 3 stories tall at the edge of Blackwater Creek in Newton County, Arkansas. The structure was imposing against the backdrop of the densely wooded hills, a Victorian-style building with intricate woodwork along the eaves, tall windows, and a wide wraparound porch that offered guests views of both the creek and the distant mountains. Built in 1882 by Thomas Holloway, a former railroad man from Pennsylvania, the hotel had become known as a respectable establishment for travelers passing through the increasingly prosperous mining region. With the discovery of zinc in the nearby hills and the expansion of timber operations throughout the Ozarks, Newton County had seen a steady influx of businessmen, land speculators, and workers seeking opportunity in what had once been a remote and isolated area. The hotel itself was positioned strategically approximately 3 miles outside the county seat of Jasper along what was then called the Harrison Pike. The location offered both convenience for travelers and the privacy that many guests of means preferred. The surrounding forest of oak, hickory, and pine created a natural barrier between the establishment and the scrutiny of the town, while the burbling waters of Blackwater Creek provided both a pleasant auditory backdrop and a reliable water source. In spring and summer, wildflowers carpeted the approach to the hotel. In autumn, the foliage blazed with color, and in winter, the stark branches against the gray sky lent the scene a somber dignity befitting an establishment that catered to a clientele with serious business in the region. County records housed in the Jasper Courthouse indicate the Holloway family purchased the land from the Harrington estate following a significant drop in value after 3 unexplained deaths on the property between 1876 and 1879. The first death, that of landowner William Harrington, was attributed to heart failure, though the medical examiner's report notes the unusual contortion of the deceased's features, suggesting his final moments were marked by extreme terror. The second death, that of Harrington's eldest son, James, was ruled an accident after he apparently fell into an old well on the property. The third death, that of groundskeeper Elijah Peterson, remains classified as misadventure, with minimal documentation, beyond a notation that his body was found at the base of the hill behind the main house, partially submerged in Blackwater Creek. According to a deed of sale dated March 12, 1881, Thomas Holloway acquired the 6-acre parcel for approximately 1/3 of its previous assessed value. The document contains an unusual addendum, noting that the seller, Elizabeth Harrington, widow of the previous owner, stipulated that certain underground features of the property remain undisturbed as per family tradition. This stipulation was struck through with a single line and initialed by both parties, suggesting Holloway had negotiated its removal. Elizabeth Harrington relocated to St. Louis immediately after the sale and, according to later inquiries, refused all correspondence regarding the property until her death in 1897. Construction began in April 1881, and local newspapers documented the progress with enthusiasm. The Newton County Register, in an article dated June 3, 1881, noted that Mr. Holloway's hotel promises to be the most modern establishment within 50 miles, featuring indoor plumbing, gas lighting, and all manner of conveniences for the discerning traveler. The article further mentioned that Holloway had hired 20 local men for the construction, supplemented by specialized craftsmen brought in from Springfield and St. Louis for the more technical aspects of the building. What went unreported was that the hotel was constructed atop an older structure, preserving only the stone foundation and what Thomas Holloway described in his building permit application as a serviceable well chamber. According to tax assessments from 1883, The hotel contained 36 rooms, a dining hall, and unusually extensive basement facilities that consumed nearly twice the construction materials of comparable establishments. One worker from the original construction crew, Samuel Davies, provided an account to the County Historical Society in 1951, shortly before his death. Then, in his 90s, Davies recalled, "Mr. Holloway was particular about the basement work. Most of us local boys were kept to the upper floors and outer walls. He brought in 4 men from outside, wouldn't say where from, but they spoke with northern accents, to handle what he called the specialized underground work. We were told the basement needed extra reinforcement due to the creek's proximity and risk of flooding, but those men worked at night mostly, and Holloway kept the basement locked during the day. One morning I arrived early and saw them unloading metal pipes, not the usual kind for water or gas, but something heavier, with unusual fittings. When they saw me watching, one of them covered the pipes with canvas. Holloway appeared and sent me to work on the 3rd floor for the rest of the week." The hotel opened to considerable fanfare on January 15, 1882. Photographs preserved in the County Historical Society show Thomas Holloway, a stocky man with a carefully maintained mustache and receding dark hair, standing proudly beside his wife Margaret on the front steps. Margaret Holloway, according to contemporary accounts, was a quiet, pale woman originally from Baltimore, whose family had connections to shipping interests along the eastern seaboard. The couple had no children, a fact that occasionally prompted speculation among the more gossipy elements of local society. The opening celebration drew prominent citizens from throughout the county, as well as representatives from several mining and timber companies with interests in the region. The Register described the event as the most significant social gathering in recent memory, marking Newton County's continued progress towards civilized amenities comparable to those found in more established regions. For the first 18 years of its operation, the Holloway Hotel maintained a reputation for comfort, cleanliness, and respectability. Business records submitted for tax purposes show a steady increase in revenue through the 1880s, with a slight decline during the economic panic of 1893, followed by recovery in subsequent years. Thomas Holloway became a respected figure in local business circles, serving on the town council from 1885 to 1889 and contributing regularly to community projects, including the construction of a new schoolhouse in 1887 and repairs to the county courthouse in 1890. Nothing in these documents suggests financial distress or irregularities, though later investigation would reveal that Thomas Holloway maintained a separate set of books that painted a considerably different picture. Personal correspondence discovered in the effects of Joshua Williams, president of First National Bank of Jasper, indicates that by late 1898, Holloway had overextended himself through investments in several speculative mining ventures. A letter from Williams to his brother in Little Rock, dated November 22, 1898, notes, "Thomas Holloway approached me yesterday, seeking additional financing for his latest venture in the Buffalo River region. I regret that circumstances required me to decline. His previous 3 attempts at mineral development have proven disappointing, and the bank's directors will not approve further exposure." He did not take the news well, muttering something about alternative arrangements as he departed. "I fear his financial situation may be more precarious than is generally known." A separate ledger discovered during the 1964 investigation reveals that by January 1899, the hotel was operating at a significant loss, with mortgage payments 3 months in arrears and suppliers threatening to cut off credit. Entries in this ledger, kept in Holloway's distinctive handwriting, document increasingly desperate attempts to secure additional funding, including approaches to investors as far away as St. Louis and Kansas City. A notation from February 1899 reads simply, "All conventional avenues exhausted. Must consider M's suggestion regarding Baltimore connections, though the humiliation would be considerable." The first documented irregularities appeared in the Newton County Register on April 17, 1900, when a brief notice mentioned the disappearance of Mary Carver, a 29-year-old seamstress from Springfield, who had been staying at the hotel while completing work for several prominent local families. The notice was small, barely 3 lines, tucked between advertisements for patent medicines and a farm auction. Miss Mary Carver, recently of Springfield and temporarily residing at the Holloway Hotel, has departed the area without notice, leaving several commissions unfinished. Parties with outstanding arrangements are advised to contact Madame Ellsworth's dressmaking in Jasper for completion of work. Her absence was not treated as suspicious. Women often moved on without announcement in those days, and the economic uncertainties of the period made sudden departures commonplace. What the notice failed to mention was that Mary Carver had left behind a partially completed dress for the daughter of County Commissioner Harold Williams, along with her sewing kit, patterns, and personal effects. These items were discovered in her room, number 31 on the eastern wing of the second floor, by a chambermaid 2 days after she was last seen at dinner in the hotel restaurant. The chambermaid, later identified as Mary Ellis, reported the discovery to Thomas Holloway, who assured her he would contact the authorities. No official report was filed until Commissioner Williams personally inquired about the status of his daughter's dress 10 days later. The commissioner's personal journal, made available to investigators in 1964 by his grandson, contains this entry from April 27, 1900. Called upon Thomas Holloway today regarding the Carver woman's disappearance. Elizabeth's dress remains unfinished, and Mrs. Williams is most displeased. Holloway claims the woman departed without notice, leaving her possessions behind, which he had already disposed of as abandoned. When I suggested this behavior seemed inconsistent with a professional seamstress's reputation, he became agitated, insisting she had mentioned plans to seek opportunities in Kansas City. I find this explanation unsatisfactory, but see little to be gained from further inquiry into a dressmaking matter. Have arranged for Madame Ellsworth to complete Elizabeth's dress, though at considerable additional expense. Williams made no further mention of the incident, apparently considering it a minor inconvenience rather than cause for alarm. This attitude reflected the general social climate of the period, particularly regarding single women without family connections in the area. The disappearance of such individuals rarely prompted serious investigation, especially when a plausible explanation was offered by someone of Holloway's standing in the community. Within 3 months, the Register published another small notice about a missing person, James Whitfield, 42, a traveling Bible salesman last seen checking into the Holloway on June 29th. His horse and sample case remained unclaimed in the hotel stable for nearly a week before the stable master brought the matter to the attention of Deputy Sheriff Lionel Hayes. The notice, published July 8, 1900, stated only that information is sought regarding the whereabouts of Mr. James Whitfield, representative of the American Bible Society, who may have traveled to Harrison or points beyond. Inquiries may be directed to the office of the sheriff. Local authorities conducted what was described as a cursory inquiry that yielded no results. The hotel register showed Whitfield had been assigned room 27, but the bed appeared unused when inspected 2 days later. Hayes's initial report, preserved in county records, notes, "Mystery." Holloway states the gentleman departed before dawn on June 30th, leaving his horse and goods to be collected by a colleague expected to arrive from Springfield. No such colleague has appeared. Telegrams to the American Bible Society's regional office in St. Louis confirm Whitfield was in their employ, but provide no explanation for his apparent abandonment of property. Society representatives express concern as this behavior is inconsistent with Whitfield's 12 years of reliable service. They have requested the horse and materials be forwarded to their Springfield office until the matter is resolved. The report concludes with Hayes's observation that, while circumstances appear unusual, no evidence of foul play has been discovered. The matter will remain open pending additional information. The horse and Bible samples were indeed shipped to Springfield the following week, and the official inquiry effectively ended. Privately, however, Hayes began keeping separate notes on the incident, particularly after learning that Whitfield had been assigned a room in the same wing of the hotel as Mary Carver. What connects these disappearances is not what was found, but what wasn't. No luggage recovered, no personal effects claimed by family, no bodies, just empty rooms with beds that looked barely slept in, according to the handwritten notes of Deputy Sheriff Lionel Hayes, preserved in county archives. Hayes, a methodical man who had served as deputy for nearly a decade, began to take a personal interest in the pattern emerging at the Holloway Hotel. His notes, initially formal and procedural, gradually reveal increasing suspicion. An entry from July 20th, 1900 reads, "Revisited the Holloway Hotel today, ostensibly to return papers found in Whitfield's Bible case. Requested to see room 27 again, claiming concern about possible evidence overlooked. Holloway initially refused, stating the room was occupied, but when pressed admitted it was being renovated due to water damage. Observed fresh paint on the floor near the bed. When questioned about the timing of these renovations, Holloway claimed they had been planned for months, no record of such plans in previous inspections. Most curious. By September 1900, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. 3 more guests had vanished, a young married couple from Kansas City named Edward and Lillian Barrow, and a mining investor from Chicago named Samuel Crenshaw. All 3 had signed the hotel register. All 3 had been assigned rooms on the eastern wing of the second floor. None were ever seen again. The Barrows had arrived on August 17th, planning to visit family in Harrison before continuing to Texas, where Edward had secured employment with a cattle operation. They were assigned room 29. Crenshaw checked in on September 2nd, reportedly to assess potential investments in local zinc mining operations. He was given room 31, the same room previously occupied by Mary Carver. The hotel owner, Thomas Holloway, maintained that each guest had simply departed early. He produced receipts showing payment for shortened stays. When questioned about personal belongings, Holloway explained that nothing had been left behind. Every missing person had, according to him, packed methodically and departed in the early morning hours before the main desk was staffed. Many of our guests prefer an early start, he told Deputy Hayes during a formal interview on September 7, 1900, particularly those with significant distance to cover. We accommodate such preferences by preparing cold breakfast baskets upon request and unlocking the side entrance for departure before dawn. Hayes's notes from October 3, 1900 indicate a change in tone. Mr. Holloway's explanations grow less convincing with each incident. There is something in his manner, a tightness around the eyes when questioned, that suggests concealment rather than confusion. Today I inquired about the Barrows specifically, noting that their family in Harrison still awaits their arrival 2 months hence. Holloway claimed they had mentioned a change of plans, deciding to visit Hot Springs before continuing to Harrison. When pressed on how a young couple of apparently modest means would afford such a detour, he became visibly agitated, suggesting I direct my inquiries to the stage office for confirmation of their departure. The stage office has no record of the Barrows as passengers. Hayes continues, most concerning is the pattern emerging regarding room assignments. Each missing guest was housed in the eastern wing, specifically rooms 27, 29, or 31. When I requested to inspect these rooms today, Holloway claimed all 3 were occupied by a hunting party from Springfield. I observed the registration book showed only 2 entries for the current date, neither from Springfield. Upon noting this discrepancy, Holloway claimed the 3rd hunter had not yet arrived, but was expected on the evening stage. I remained in town until the stage arrived at 7:15 p.m. No passengers disembarked for the Holloway Hotel. The most compelling document from this period is a letter dated October 9, 1900, sent by Mary Ellis, the chambermaid at the hotel, to her sister in Joplin. The letter, discovered during the renovation of a Joplin home in 1963, contains this passage, I cannot sleep well any more. The noises from below are constant now. Mr. Holloway says it's just the pipes and the settling of the foundation, but pipes don't make sounds like that. Pipes don't sound like scratching, and pipes certainly don't make sounds that almost, but not quite, resemble words. Mrs. Holloway seems nearly as troubled as I am. I've seen her standing at the basement door listening, her face white as laundered sheets. Last Tuesday, after everyone had gone to bed, I followed Mr. Holloway when he thought no one was watching. He carried a tray with food down to the old cellar, the one guests never see. He locked the door behind him and was gone nearly an hour. When he returned, the tray was empty, but his sleeves were wet to the elbows. I gave my notice the next morning. I leave for Joplin on Saturday's stage. I cannot remain in this place another week. The letter continues with details that Ellis apparently hesitated to include in her official statement to Hayes. There's something else, something I didn't tell the deputy when he questioned me about the missing guests. The night before Miss Carver disappeared, I was turning down the beds on the second floor when I heard Mr. Holloway in his office. The door was ajar, and I could see him at his desk moving something that looked like small levers or switches built into the underside of the desktop. He was muttering to himself something about preparation and mechanism engagement. When he noticed me in the hallway, he slammed the desk drawer and demanded to know why I was on that floor after hours. I explained my duties, and he seemed to calm himself, but insisted I complete my work and retire immediately. The next morning Miss Carver was gone, and room 31 had that strange smell like wet metal and something sour I couldn't place. I've detected the same odor after each disappearance, always in those 3 rooms on the eastern wing. Mary Ellis departed as planned on October 13, 1900. Her replacement, a local woman named Sarah Jenkins, lasted only 17 days before similarly departing without collecting her final week's wages. No written account of her experiences has been discovered, but her grandson, interviewed in 1967 as part of the Historical Society's documentation project, recalled that Grandma would never speak of her time at the Holloway, except to say that some places aren't meant for decent folk to linger. She wouldn't even walk on that side of the street for the rest of her days in Jasper. Once, when I was about 12, I asked her directly what had frightened her so badly. She looked at me for a long time, then said, "Some things hunger in ways that can't be satisfied. Some appetites only grow with feeding." She would say no more on the subject and grew upset if pressed. The hotel continued operating through the fall of 1900, though local newspapers noted a marked decrease in occupancy. Residents of the small town began to avoid the establishment. A report filed by Hayes on November 12th notes that locals no longer take their Sunday meals at the Holloway dining room, despite it being the only proper restaurant within 15 miles. When questioned, most offer vague excuses about preferring home cooking, but several have privately expressed concerns about the string of disappearances. Rumors circulate about strange noises from the basement and an unusual odor that sometimes pervades the eastern wing. I have detected this odor myself during 2 visits, a sour, organic smell, unlike typical plumbing or kitchen odors. Holloway dismisses these concerns as country superstition and attributes any unusual smells to issues with the septic system, which he claims to have scheduled for repair. Hayes's personal journal, which he kept separate from his official reports, reveals growing frustration with the lack of official action. Judge Prescott denied my request for a search warrant today, claiming insufficient evidence of criminal activity. The judge and Holloway are known to socialize regularly at the Masonic Lodge, which may explain his reluctance. I have written to the federal marshal's office in Fort Smith seeking guidance, as I believe something unnatural occurs at the Holloway Hotel. 5 individuals, possibly more that have gone unreported, have vanished without trace over 6 months, all from the same establishment. This cannot be coincidence, yet I find myself unable to proceed through official channels. What transformed the situation from troubling to horrific was the arrival of winter. On December 7, 1900, a severe ice storm struck the Ozarks, knocking down power lines and isolating smaller communities for days. Trees heavy with ice crashed across roads, making travel impossible. Temperatures plummeted to record lows, with meteorological records from the period indicating overnight readings of 15 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The Holloway Hotel, with its own generator, became a refuge for stranded travelers. County records indicate 17 people checked in during the storm, including a family of 4 from Eureka Springs, 3 salesmen from St. Dom, Louis, a retired school teacher from Fayetteville, 2 sisters traveling to visit relatives in Harrison, and several others whose identities were recorded only by initial in the hotel register. Weather records show the temperature remained below freezing for 11 consecutive days. The Eureka Springs Gazette later published an inquiry about the Thornton family, Edward and Martha, with children Samuel 9 and Emma 7, who had departed for Harrison on December 5th and were expected to arrive for Christmas with Martha's parents. The notice, dated December 28, 1900, reads, "Information sought regarding the whereabouts of the Edward Thornton family, who departed Eureka Springs on December 5th en route to Harrison. The family would have been traveling by private carriage and may have sought shelter during the recent severe weather. Any persons with knowledge of their movements are requested to contact the Gazette office or Sheriff Thomas in Harrison." No response to this inquiry was ever published. When the roads finally cleared on December 19th, only Thomas Holloway and his wife Margaret remained at the hotel. According to their statement to authorities, all guests had departed as soon as travel became possible again. No one in town reported seeing any travelers leave. The stagecoach service had no record of additional passengers. The nearest train station reported no unusual increase in ticket sales. When Deputy Hayes inquired about the family from Eureka Springs, the Thorntons, consisting of parents and 2 children, aged 7 and 9, Holloway produced a register entry showing they had stayed only 3 nights instead of the 11 days of the storm. Hayes noted in his personal journal, later recovered from his effects, that no family, particularly one with small children, could have departed into weather still hovering near 0 degrees, with roads largely impassable. The explanation defies both logic and human capability. Hayes' journal entry from December 21st reveals his mounting concern. "I visited the hotel again today, ostensibly to inquire after mail delivery that may have been delayed by the storm. The atmosphere has changed perceptibly. Margaret Holloway, always reserved, now appears actively frightened. Her hands trembled as she served tea, and she started violently at a sound from the basement. A dull thud followed by what might have been scraping. Thomas explained it as ice falling from the roof onto the cellar doors, though the temperature has not risen above freezing for days. Most disturbing was their reaction when I inquired about the Thornton children specifically, asking if they had seemed well when they departed. Margaret dropped her teacup, shattering it on the floor, while Thomas's face flushed dark red. He insisted all guests had departed in good health, then cut our meeting short, claiming urgent business in the kitchen. The entry continues, "Before leaving, I contrived to speak briefly with the cook, Mrs. Abernathy, who has worked at the hotel since its opening. She appeared nervous and refused to meet my gaze, but when I mentioned the strange sounds, she whispered, 'It's hungry now,' more than before. When I asked what she meant, she looked toward the kitchen door to ensure we were alone, then said, 'The well beneath. It's always been there, but he's fed it too much. It wants more now, always more.' She would say nothing further and hurried away when Thomas re-entered the room. Deputy Hayes, increasingly suspicious, attempted to obtain a warrant to search the premises in detail. His request, preserved in county archives, contains this passage: 'I believe there is sufficient cause to conduct a thorough examination of all rooms, storage areas, and especially the basement facilities of the Holloway Hotel.' The pattern of disappearances coinciding with residency at this establishment cannot be dismissed as coincidence. Of particular concern is the apparent impossibility of 17 individuals departing the area without detection during or immediately following the recent storm. I formally request authorization to examine all portions of the property with specific attention to areas not normally accessible to guests or the general public. The warrant was denied by Judge William Prescott, who, records later revealed, had received a substantial loan from Thomas Holloway 3 months earlier to cover gambling debts incurred during a private card game in Fort Smith. A note in the judge's personal ledger, discovered during a later unrelated investigation into judicial misconduct, records a payment of $750 from Holloway on September 12, 1900, with the notation, "Private arrangement, terms as discussed." Hayes was reassigned to another district the following week, transferred to the remote western edge of the county where his duties primarily involved settling disputes between isolated homesteaders. His personal journal reveals frustration. The transfer comes as no surprise, though the speed of execution suggests powerful interference. Prescott's involvement is obvious to anyone with eyes to see. I have written to the county prosecutor directly, bypassing local channels, but expect little result. Something unnatural occurs at the Holloway, and those with authority to investigate have been rendered either blind or complicit. The prosecutor, Andrew Morton, did respond to Hayes's letter, though not in the manner hoped. A brief note dated January 7, 1901, advises Hayes to focus on your new duties and leave the Holloway matter to those positioned to address it properly. Continued unofficial investigation exceeds your authority and may result in more permanent reassignment. The matter is closed. Morton's personal connections to Judge Prescott were well established. They had been law partners before Prescott's appointment to the bench and maintained both social and financial ties. The hotel continued operating through the winter and into the spring of 1901, though with significantly reduced occupancy. Local residents avoided the establishment entirely, and travelers passing through increasingly opted for simpler accommodations at boarding houses or campsites, rather than the once prestigious hotel. Thomas Holloway was observed making frequent trips to Eureka Springs and Harrison, reportedly seeking financing for renovations and expansion. Bank records from the period indicate these efforts were unsuccessful. A notation in the ledger of Harrison National Bank dated March 27, 1901, reads simply, "Loan application from T. Holloway, Jasper, denied. Previous inquiries from Newton County authorities raise concerns about business viability." During this period, Margaret Holloway's health appeared to deteriorate significantly. Dr. Samuel Wilson, the county physician, recorded 3 visits to the hotel between January and March 1901 to treat Mrs. Holloway for what he described as nervous exhaustion and auditory disturbances. His medical notes, later provided to investigators, mention her complaints of persistent noises from below the floorboards and voices calling her name from the walls. Dr. Wilson prescribed laudanum and suggested she consider residing with relatives until her health improved, a recommendation Thomas Holloway reportedly dismissed as unnecessary and impractical. A particularly revealing document from this period is a letter Margaret wrote to her sister in Baltimore, dated February 17, 1901, but apparently never sent. The letter was discovered in a drawer of her writing desk when the hotel contents were inventoried following the fire. In it, she writes, "I can bear this no longer, Elizabeth. The things Thomas has done in the name of financial salvation have damned us both. The noises never stop now, scratching, whispering, sometimes what sounds like children crying. He says it's my imagination, but I've seen his face when the sounds grow louder. He knows. He feeds it still, though he promised after December he would stop. Last week a mineral surveyor passed through, and Thomas directed him to room 27. I pleaded illness and remained in our quarters with the door locked, but the sounds that night, I cannot describe them." The surveyor was gone in the morning, his horse still in the stable. Thomas sold it 3 days later to a trader from Harrison. I have begun taking twice the laudanum dose Dr. Wilson prescribed. It is the only way I can sleep, though even then, the dreams are filled with scratching sounds and voices calling from deep, wet places. Then, on April 3, 1901, a fire broke out in the eastern wing. According to the Newton County Register's account, published April 5th, the blaze was discovered shortly after midnight by a passing freight wagon driver who observed flames from the second-floor windows. By the time volunteer firefighters arrived, the blaze had consumed most of the second floor. The article notes that Mr. and Mrs. Holloway escaped unharmed, having been awakened by the smoke. No guests were registered at the time, a fortunate circumstance that prevented potential tragedy. The cause of the fire was officially recorded as likely electrical fault, though the hotel's isolated location on the power grid made detailed investigation difficult. What the newspaper account failed to mention, but later investigation uncovered, was that the fire originated specifically in rooms 27, 29, and 31, the same rooms associated with all previous disappearances. The volunteer fire chief's report, filed with the county but not published, notes this curious concentration. Damage indicates fire began simultaneously in 3 separate locations on the second floor, eastern wing. Such a pattern is inconsistent with electrical fire, which typically spreads from a single point of origin. Evidence suggests accelerant may have been employed, though the extensive damage prevents definitive determination. Insurance records from Continental Assurance Company, discovered during a corporate archive digitization project in 1967, reveal that Thomas Holloway had increased his policy coverage by 300% just 6 weeks before the fire. The claim was initially denied based on suspicion of arson, but later settled for 60% of the requested amount after intervention by Judge Prescott, who wrote personally to the insurance company's regional director. The letter, preserved in Continental's files, cites Holloway's exemplary character and significant contributions to local development as reasons to resolve the claim favorably despite minor irregularities in the timing of policy adjustments. Rather than rebuild, the Holloways sold the damaged property to a distant cousin, Elias Holloway, who had recently arrived from Baltimore. The sale, recorded on May 17, 1901, transferred the property for a nominal sum with several unusual conditions, including a stipulation that the existing foundation and basement structures remain undisturbed and that no excavation exceed a depth of 6 feet without prior written approval from the seller. Thomas and Margaret relocated to Denver, where they purchased a significantly larger hotel near the city center using funds from the insurance settlement. No charges were ever filed against them in connection with the disappearances or the fire. A telegram sent by Thomas to Elias on June 2, 1901, preserved in the younger Holloway's effects and discovered during the 1964 investigation, contains a cryptic warning. Basement remains sealed as agreed. Do not attempt access under any circumstance. Previous unfortunate events resulted from exploration below ground level. Maintain distance from eastern foundation area particularly. Disregard local superstition, but observe practical caution regarding original structure. Here the narrative might have ended. Another frontier mystery, unsolved but eventually forgotten, as the 20th century brought new concerns and developments to the Ozarks. But in 1937, during the height of the Depression, Elias Holloway's son, Frederick, decided to renovate the remaining structure to create affordable housing for workers employed by the newly established Civilian Conservation Corps camps in the area. The original hotel had been partially rebuilt following the 1901 fire, but only the western wing and central portion had been restored. The eastern wing, where all the disappearances had occurred, remained a charred shell, deemed too costly to rebuild during the economic constraints of the early 1900s. Frederick Holloway, having grown up with his father's strict instructions never to disturb the foundation or basement areas, had largely honored this restriction during his ownership of the property. However, the expansion of CCC operations in the region created unprecedented demand for worker housing, and the financial opportunities outweighed family traditions. In May 1937, he hired a construction crew from Springfield to clear the debris from the eastern wing and prepare the area for new construction. Workers clearing debris from the collapsed eastern wing made a discovery that was briefly reported in the Newton County Gazette on June 17, 1937. Renovation efforts at the old Holloway property revealed an unusual architectural feature. A secondary well shaft, approximately 4 feet in diameter, was discovered adjacent to the original water well in the foundation. Due to safety concerns, county officials have ordered the area reinforced and permanently sealed. The article contains additional details not widely circulated at the time. Workers reported unusual conditions surrounding the shaft, including an offensive odor described as similar to a slaughterhouse in summer, and metal surfaces showing extreme corrosion unlike typical water damage. Most curious was the discovery of what appeared to be mechanical components embedded in the shaft, walls including metal tracks and a partially deteriorated pulley system. The secondary shaft appears to have been sealed with concrete at some point, though the seal had partially cracked, revealing a deep opening that workers estimated extended at least 60 feet below ground level. Construction foreman Henry Russell speculated these might have been part of an early elevator mechanism, though their purpose in a well shaft remains unclear. The article might have gone unnoticed if not for a letter to the editor published 3 days later from Oliver Hayes, son of the former deputy. His letter, remarkably restrained given the circumstances, simply noted that his father had suspected something hidden in the Holloway Hotel's foundations for years, and suggested that a more thorough investigation might be warranted before the well was sealed. My father maintained until his death in 1934 that the disappearances associated with the hotel in 1900 were never adequately explained, Hayes wrote. He believed that evidence might be found in areas of the foundation not normally accessible. While I have no personal knowledge of these matters, I feel it would be a disservice to those who vanished to seal away what might be the only remaining evidence without proper examination. Hayes' letter prompted a brief response from the current sheriff, William Garrett, who visited the site on June 22, 1937. His report, filed with county records but not published, dismisses concerns. Examined excavation site at Holloway property. Secondary shaft appears to be nothing more than an abandoned well, likely predating hotel construction. Mechanical components mentioned in newspaper account are consistent with typical well-drawing machinery from the period. No evidence of anything suspicious or connected to alleged disappearances nearly 4 decades ago. Recommend proceeding with sealing as planned for safety considerations. No investigation occurred. County officials facing economic pressures and limited resources during the Depression prioritized safety concerns over historical mysteries. The secondary well was filled with concrete and the renovation continued. Frederick Holloway opened a boarding house on the site in September 1937. It operated without incident until 1943, when wartime rationing made continued operation unprofitable. The building was converted to storage space for the remainder of the war, housing excess equipment for nearby military training operations. What remained unrecorded in official documents, but later emerged through interviews conducted in the 1960s, were the experiences of the workers who sealed the secondary well. Robert Johnson, who operated the concrete mixer during the operation, told investigators, "That hole wasn't right. When we first opened the seal, there was a rush of air from below, not flowing out like you'd expect from a pressurized space, but more like something pulling in, like the shaft was inhaling. It made this sound, not wind exactly, more like, I don't know how to describe it except to say it sounded hungry. We poured nearly twice the calculated amount of concrete before it seemed full. Engineer couldn't explain it, said there must be side chambers we couldn't see. But the strange thing was, as we were finishing, I could have sworn I heard something moving down there, beneath all that wet concrete, something big shifting around. The foreman said it was just the material settling, but I've worked construction my whole life, and concrete doesn't settle like that. It doesn't make sounds like that. The property changed hands several times over the subsequent decades, serving variously as a hardware store, a church meeting hall, and finally, by the late 1950s, standing vacant and increasingly derelict. Local children developed elaborate dares involving spending nights in the haunted Holloway, though no formal records exist of paranormal incidents during this period. A series of interviews conducted by the Ozark Folklore Society in 1959 with longtime residents yielded only vague references to bad feelings and unhealthy air associated with the property. One account provided by retired teacher Eleanor Mitchell stands out. I taught at the county school from 1938 to 1956, and I recall several children from families who lived in the Holloway boarding house during the late 30s. They would come to school exhausted, claiming they couldn't sleep because of noises in the walls. One child, a bright girl named Susan Collins, brought in a drawing for an art project that disturbed me so much I kept it. It showed the building with what looked like faces emerging from the foundation stones. When I asked about it, she said, "That's where the hungry people live. They scrape at night looking for food." Her family moved to Springfield the following month. In 1962, the property was purchased by the Ozark Historical Society with the intention of restoration as part of a broader initiative to preserve significant structures from the region's past. The society, operating on a grant from the State Historical Commission, hired architectural historian Raymond Chandler to assess the building's condition and historical significance. During initial assessment work, Chandler noticed inconsistencies in the foundation blueprints. The original construction plans, filed with the county in 1882, showed a single well in the northwest corner of the foundation. However, the actual structure contained evidence of 3 separate shafts: the original well, the secondary well discovered in 1937, and a third, previously undocumented shaft beneath what had once been the hotel kitchen. Chandler's field notes, preserved in the Society's archives, express bewilderment. The tertiary shaft differs significantly from standard well construction of the period. The opening is narrower, barely wide enough for a man to enter, and the shaft descends at an angle, rather than vertically. Most peculiarly, the interior appears to be lined with metal rather than stone. The metal shows significant corrosion and an unusual pattern of pitting that suggests exposure to highly acidic conditions. This is not consistent with any water well technology in use in the 1880s, nor with any other subterranean structure I have encountered in 23 years of architectural documentation throughout the Ozark region. His notes continue. The arrangement of the 3 shafts creates a triangular pattern with roughly equal spacing between them. This geometric precision suggests intentional design rather than incremental addition as water needs increased. Most curious is the discovery of narrow channels cut into the foundation stones, radiating from each shaft location toward specific points in the original structure's layout. These channels, approximately 3 inches in width and depth, appear designed to accommodate pipes or similar conduits, though no such installations remain intact for examination. The pattern of channels leading from the eastern shaft aligns precisely with the locations of rooms 27, 29, and 31 on the second floor, the same rooms mentioned in historical accounts of disappearances at the hotel. Chandler also noted discrepancies in the dimensions of certain rooms compared to the original blueprints. His measurements indicated that several second-floor rooms in the eastern wing, specifically rooms 27, 29, and 31, those associated with the disappearances, had floors approximately 8 inches thinner than architectural standards would dictate, with no corresponding difference in ceiling height from the rooms below. The discrepancy, he wrote, suggests modification of the original design during construction. The purpose of reducing floor thickness in only these specific rooms remains unclear, though it raises concerns about structural integrity. The Historical Society, operating on a limited budget, opted to postpone further investigation of the shafts until the main structure was stabilized. This work proceeded slowly through 1963, hampered by funding shortages and structural challenges. Local volunteers provided much of the labor, working weekends under Chandler's supervision to shore up sagging joists and replace rotted support beams. In April 1964, a significant discovery altered the trajectory of the project. Workers removing damaged flooring in what had been the hotel's private dining room uncovered a small metal box containing a leather-bound journal. The box, made of copper with a simple clasp mechanism, had been concealed beneath a section of subflooring that showed evidence of having been removed and replaced at some point. The journal, water-damaged but partially legible, belonged to Thomas Holloway. According to the Society's acquisition log, the journal covered the period from January 1899 to March 1901. Many pages had been torn out, and others were too damaged to read. What remained, however, painted a disturbing picture of financial desperation, unusual discoveries, and ultimately horrific actions taken to preserve the Holloway family's economic status. Entries from February 1899 describe Holloway's increasing financial difficulties. The investments in the mining operations have yielded nothing but debt. 3 years of work, and we stand to lose everything. The Simmons property proved worthless despite the assayer's reports, and the Matthews claim flooded beyond recovery last month. The bank has called in 2 notes already, with the 3rd expected by summer. M speaks of returning to her family in Baltimore, but I cannot face such humiliation. Yesterday I approached Williams at the bank one final time, but he was unmoved by our long association. Business is business, he said, as if that phrase absolves all human consideration. We have perhaps 3 months before foreclosure becomes inevitable. A later entry, dated March 17, 1899, marks a turning point. The Harrington woman's warning suddenly makes sense. I have spent the past week exploring the original foundation chambers, areas I had previously avoided due to her strange insistence that they remain undisturbed. Behind the old stone wall in the northeast corner of the cellar, I discovered a passage leading to a chamber unlike anything I have encountered. The dimensions of the space defy the measurements of the foundation above. It seems larger inside than should be possible, given the building's footprint. But it is what lies at the center that has changed everything. I dare not describe it fully even in these private pages. Suffice to say, it is not a well in any conventional sense, though it contains a substance that flows like liquid. M refuses to look at it, saying the smell alone confirms her family's legends about the Harrington property. She claims her grandmother once mentioned a place in the Ozarks where something hungry lives in the earth. I dismiss this as superstition until now. By June 1899, Holloway's tone had changed. The discovery beneath the kitchen has altered everything. I cannot commit to paper the full extent of what I have found, but suffice to say that the previous owner's reluctance to access the lower chambers was based on cowardice rather than structural concerns. What flows there may be our salvation. The liquid exhibits properties unlike anything described in scientific literature. Its consistency and behavior defy explanation by conventional chemistry. Most importantly, its hunger appears insatiable. The initial tests with small animals confirm that it consumes organic matter completely, leaving no trace within hours. The possibilities for practical application are significant, though M grows increasingly distressed by my experiments. She refuses to enter the basement now, claiming she hears sounds from below even when I have conducted no tests. The journal then documents extensive work in the hotel basement. All was conducted at night when staff had departed. Holloway mentions hiring 2 men from outside the county to assist with modifications to the original shaft and installation of the collection system. Both men were paid in cash and sent away upon completion. An entry from August 28, 1899 notes, "The eastern wing modifications are complete. The mechanisms function smoothly in tests. The remote activation from my office works without noise, though the system requires significant weight to trigger fully. This will not be a concern given the intended application. M discovered me testing the controls yesterday and became hysterical, threatening to expose everything. I reminded her that such action would result in our complete financial ruin. She has retreated to her room with her laudanum. I have doubled her usual dose to ensure her cooperation, at least in the short term. Another entry, dated September 5, 1899, provides technical details. The secondary shaft now connects to the primary chamber through a system of channels carved into the bedrock. The limestone proved easier to work than anticipated, almost as if the stone wanted to yield. Most remarkable is the behavior of the substance when the channels were opened. It flowed upward against gravity, coating the new surfaces as if curious about the expansion of its domain. The workers did not observe this, as I had sent them away before the final connections were made. Some things are not meant for casual observation. The flow has now stabilized, creating a reservoir in each of the three shafts, connected but distinct. Each reservoir exhibits slightly different properties, though all share the fundamental characteristic of consumption. The most troubling entry, dated September 10, 1899, reads, "The system is complete. The three access points have been disguised as water wells, though only the northwest shaft actually provides water. The eastern shaft now connects directly to rooms 27, 29, and 31, just as the kitchen shaft connects to the private dining room. When the floor mechanisms are activated, everything above simply disappears below. M is horrified by what I've done, but cannot deny the financial necessity. The first test using livestock was successful. The well accepts everything. The sounds afterward were unexpected, but ceased within hours. The substance appears to digest not just flesh and bone, but all organic material, wood, leather, fabric. Only metal remains, and even that shows signs of corrosion after prolonged contact. I have devised a mechanism for retrieving valuable items before they suffer damage. Our financial salvation is assured, provided we select candidates carefully." The journal then documents a series of contributions to the well, beginning in April 1900. Each entry includes a room number, the calculated weight of the occupant, and a notation of how long the processing required. Names are never used, only initials. The first entry, dated April 12, 1900, reads, "MC, room 31, approximately 130 pounds, processing complete within 6 hours, no residual effects. The well satisfaction evident in quietude following. Financial benefit, recovered personal effects valued at approximately $37, plus paid room rate. No inquiries expected as subject has no local connections. Mechanism performed flawlessly. Activation from office proceeded without audibles alert to adjacent rooms. IPMO took additional laudanum and claims no knowledge of events." Subsequent entries follow a similar pattern, with increasingly clinical descriptions of what appears to be a systematic process of murder for financial gain. An entry from June 30, 1900 notes, "J.W.'s room 27, approximately 180 pounds. Processing required 9 hours, longer than anticipated, some mechanical noise from beneath floor afterward, necessitating explanation to guests of building settling. Financial benefit, horse and sample case sold in Harrison for $41, plus recovered currency of $17. Subjects' employers may inquire eventually, but connection to this establishment will be difficult to establish definitively. M, increasingly agitated despite increased laudanum. Claims to hear scratching sounds from basement, even when I detect nothing." An August entry describes the disposal of the Barrow couple. EB and LB, room 29, combined weight approximately 310 pounds. Largest contribution to date. Processing required 14 hours and produced unusual effects. The substance level in all three shafts rose noticeably, and luminescence was observed for approximately 20 minutes following complete dissolution. Most troubling was the auditory phenomenon, distinct vocalizations emanating from the primary chamber for nearly an hour after processing completed. M heard these clearly, despite being 2 floors above and under the influence of laudanum. She became hysterical, requiring physical restraint and additional sedation. I may need to consult Dr. Wilson regarding a more permanent solution to her increasing instability. Most disturbing are entries from December 1900 during the ice storm. A single entry dated December 11th contains only, "Today was most productive. Rooms 27, 29, 31, 14, 16, and 22, all activated. Total approximate weight, 1,040 pounds. The well feasts, processing ongoing through night. Sound levels higher than previous, but storm covers adequately. M took laudanum and retired early. Financial benefits substantial. The children were unexpected additions, but necessary given circumstances. The T family particularly lucrative, jewelry, pocket watch, and travel funds totaling nearly $200. This should resolve all outstanding debts, with sufficient remainder to facilitate relocation if necessary." A later entry, dated December 18, 1900, marks a shift in tone. Something has changed. The well's behavior following the December 11th contributions has been unprecedented. The substance level has risen in all shafts, nearly reaching the basement floor in some areas. Luminescence now constant rather than temporary. Most concerning are the sounds, no longer simple scratching or isolated vocalizations, but what appears to be coordinated phonation. M claims she can distinguish words, though I maintain this is impossible. She insists the voices are calling her name specifically. I have increased her laudanum dosage again, though Dr. Wilson expresses concern about potential dependency. More troubling is the physical change in the substance itself. The consistency has altered, becoming more viscous, almost textile in appearance. In the primary chamber, formations have emerged that bear unsettling resemblance to anatomical structures, tissue configurations suggesting partial reconstruction of consumed material. This was not observed in earlier stages and indicates a fundamental shift in properties. The final legible entry, dated March 18, 1901, reads, "M can no longer bear it. The sounds from below have changed. She swears she heard words last night, not just scratching. I reminded her that nothing survives the well's embrace. Nothing returns from those depths. But even I must admit that the quality of the noises has altered. Perhaps we have been too greedy. Perhaps the well has limits we have exceeded. We will conclude operations and depart as soon as arrangements can be made. Denver offers opportunity without the burden of what lies beneath us here. M insists we burn the eastern wing before departing, says it must be cleansed with fire to prevent what she calls continuation of the cycle. I have indulged this request, as the insurance policy now provides sufficient coverage to establish us comfortably elsewhere. The arrangements are in place. 3 days hence, we shall be free of this place and its hungry darkness." The Ozark Historical Society immediately contacted state authorities upon discovering the journal. A preliminary investigation began on April 30, 1964, led by State Police Detective Warren Mitchell. His initial report notes, "The journal appears authentic based on paper composition and ink analysis. If genuine, it suggests Thomas Holloway may have been responsible for numerous homicides at the hotel site between 1899 and 1901. However, the journal's references to the well and its embrace remain unclear. The technical descriptions suggest some form of mechanical apparatus was installed to deliver victims to a lower level of the structure, but the purpose or mechanism of the processing mentioned remains speculative." Mitchell continues, "Preliminary excavation around the foundation reveals evidence consistent with Holloway's descriptions of modifications. Structural analysis confirms unusual floor construction in the rooms mentioned, 27, 29, and 31, with evidence of hinged sections and mechanical trigger mechanisms accessible from a hidden passage adjacent to what would have been the hotel owner's office. These mechanisms appear designed to collapse the floor of selected rooms, creating a chute-like effect that would channel any contents toward the eastern shaft. Similar mechanisms, though less sophisticated, have been identified connecting the private dining room to the kitchen shaft. The technical achievement is considerable, especially given the period's limitations, suggesting Holloway possessed engineering knowledge beyond what his background would indicate. On May 7, 1964, excavation began at the tertiary shaft beneath the former kitchen. Workers removed the concrete seal and discovered a metal-lined shaft approximately 30 feet deep, terminating in a chamber roughly 15 feet in diameter. The chamber contained no human remains, but the walls showed evidence of unusual staining and erosion patterns. Mitchell's report describes a residue unlike typical mineral deposits found in well structures. The substance appears organic in nature, with a texture resembling partially dissolved animal tissue. The lower portions of the chamber walls exhibit significant corrosion of the metal lining, with complete penetration in several areas exposing the surrounding bedrock. Most disturbing was the discovery of what Mitchell described as formations within the chamber that defy conventional explanation. His report, accompanied by photographs now sealed in state archives, notes, "The chamber floor contains raised structures composed of a material resembling calcified tissue. These structures display organizational patterns suggesting intentional arrangement rather than random accumulation. Several formations bear unmistakable resemblance to human anatomical features, finger-like projections, curved surfaces, analogous to cranial structures, and in one case what appears to be a partial facial configuration with indentations corresponding to eye sockets and a nasal cavity." Geological specialists consulted regarding these formations have no explanation for their origin through natural processes. Forensic analysis completed on May 21, 1964, identified trace elements of human hemoglobin in samples taken from the chamber walls. The report also noted the presence of an unidentified organic compound that had partially degraded the metal lining. The compound exhibited properties similar to powerful digestive enzymes, but at concentrations not typically found in nature. Dr. Eleanor Simmons, the biochemist who conducted the analysis, wrote, "The substance bears superficial resemblance to digestive fluids found in certain carnivorous plants, but at a scale and potency that exceeds known biological systems by several orders of magnitude." The compound remains active despite decades of exposure to air and moisture, suggesting extraordinary stability. In laboratory tests, it demonstrated capability to break down organic material, including bone and hair, completely within hours. Her report continues with a disturbing observation. Most anomalous is the behavior of the substance when combined with organic material in laboratory conditions. Rather than simply dissolving the test material, porcine tissue samples, the substance appears to temporarily incorporate structural elements before breaking them down. Microscopic examination reveals a phase where the substance organizes the digested material into recognizable cellular structures before complete dissolution. This organizing property has no parallel in known biochemical processes and suggests capabilities beyond simple digestive function. As excavation continued into June, workers discovered a series of pipes connecting the three shafts. The pipes appeared designed to transport liquid from the tertiary chamber to the other two shafts. Most disturbing was the mechanism discovered beneath rooms 27, 29, and 31, a series of trapdoors operated by levers accessible only from a hidden passage behind the hotel owner's office. The floors of these rooms had been constructed with hinged sections that, when activated, would tilt at a 45-degree angle, causing anything on the floor, including beds and occupants, to slide into the waiting shaft below. Mitchell's investigation also uncovered a hidden room adjacent to the kitchen, accessible only through a concealed door in the pantry. This room contained shelving still holding various items, jewelry, watches, wallets, and other personal effects that matched descriptions of possessions belonging to individuals who had disappeared from the hotel. A leather-bound ledger found in this room contained meticulous records of items recovered and their subsequent sale or disposition, with entries corresponding to the dates of known disappearances. Detective Mitchell's final report, submitted August 12, 1964, concluded, "Evidence suggests Thomas Holloway modified the hotel structure to enable the murder of selected guests, primarily those unlikely to be immediately missed, traveling salesmen, unmarried women, and couples passing through without local connections. The victims were apparently dropped through trapdoors into a shaft leading to a chamber beneath the building. What happened in that chamber remains speculative, though chemical analysis suggests the presence of a highly corrosive substance that may have been used to dispose of remains. Conservative estimates based on hotel records indicate as many as 27 individuals may have been victims of this system between April 1900 and December 1900. The report recommended efforts to locate Thomas and Margaret Holloway, but preliminary research had already determined both had died in Denver, Thomas in 1917 of liver failure and Margaret in 1910 of what was recorded as nervous exhaustion. Hospital records from St. Mary's Sanitarium in Denver indicate Margaret Holloway was admitted in June 1908, following what was described as a nervous collapse accompanied by auditory hallucinations and extreme agitation. Notes from her attending physician, preserved in the sanitarium's archives, mention her persistent claims of hearing voices through the floorboards and conviction that something was following the family from their previous residence. A particularly revealing document from this period is a transcript of an interview conducted with Margaret by Dr. James Harrington, no relation to the property's previous owners, on September 3, 1908. In it, Margaret describes her experiences. They're not gone, you see. That's what Thomas doesn't understand. The well doesn't truly consume them. It transforms them. They become part of it, but they don't disappear. I hear them at night, calling through the walls. At first it was just sounds, scratching and tapping, then words, my name, over and over. Now they speak in sentences. They know things they shouldn't know, private conversations, thoughts I've never shared. They're learning, growing stronger. The more it consumes, the more aware it becomes. Thomas fed it so many during the storm. The children were worst of all. Their voices are clearest now. They follow us. Denver isn't far enough. Nothing would be. The interview continues with Margaret describing what she called visitations. Sometimes I see them, not just hear them. They rise from drains, seep through cracks in the floorboards. They have no proper shape, just suggestions of what they once were, a hand here, a face there, merging and separating like figures in smoke. But they're becoming more substantial. Last night one touched me, a cold, wet contact on my arm that left no mark but felt as real as your hand would. It had a child's fingers, small and seeking. They're learning to reach through, to extend beyond the pipes and chambers that once contained them. Distance doesn't matter to them now. They've found us, and they're so hungry. The investigation stalled through the remainder of 1964, hampered by the age of the case and lack of identifiable remains. In December, funding for the project was redirected to more current cases, and the site was once again sealed and abandoned. The Historical Society, concerned about liability and unsettled by the findings, sold the property to the county for a nominal fee in March 1965. In 1968, the property was purchased by developer Conrad Westfield, who planned to demolish the remaining structure and build a modern motel catering to the growing tourism industry in the Ozarks. During demolition in February 1968, workers breached the sealed primary well shaft. According to the foreman's incident report, filed with county authorities but never publicly released, one worker was lowered into the shaft to assess structural integrity before complete removal. The worker, identified as Joseph Keene, 34, descended approximately 40 feet before radio contact was interrupted. When pulled back to the surface 7 minutes later, Keene was in a state of extreme distress, unable to articulate what he had seen. He was transported to Regional Medical Center, where he was treated for shock and apparent hallucinations. Medical records indicate he repeatedly told staff that it's still alive down there, and the well isn't empty. When pressed for details, he described movement in the darkness, and something that spoke without a mouth. His medical chart contains a notation that he was observed attempting to plug his ears with cotton from his pillow, explaining to a nurse that, "It knows my name now. It's calling me." A more detailed account comes from Dr. Michael Reynolds, the attending physician, whose private notes were later provided to investigators. Patient exhibits symptoms consistent with extreme psychological trauma. Physical examination reveals no injuries beyond minor abrasions consistent with rapid ascent through confined space. Most concerning is the patient's insistence that something in the well shaft communicated with him directly, not through audible speech, but through what he describes as thoughts that weren't mine pushing into my head. He claims to have received specific information about his personal history that he had shared with no one at the worksite, including details about a childhood incident in Ohio. Patient also reports visual phenomena in the shaft, shapes made of darkness, moving against the darkness, and faces forming and dissolving in something like thick water. When questioned about whether these might have been hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation, patient became agitated, insisting, "It touched me. It knows me now. It won't forget." Keene checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice on February 17, 1968. He left Newton County the same day and, according to a brief follow-up investigation, relocated to Oregon. He declined all requests for further statements about his experience in the well shaft. A single letter from Keene to the county sheriff, dated March 3, 1968, contains only the brief statement, "Whatever is down there should remain buried. Fill it with concrete. Fill it with stone. Then pray it's enough." Westfield abandoned the development project shortly thereafter, citing unexpected environmental concerns. The property was sold to the county for a nominal sum and designated as unsuitable for development. County records indicate that in March 1968, approximately 30 cubic yards of concrete were poured into the well shafts. A notation in the work order specifies that the concrete was mixed with additional materials requested by county engineer, later identified as rock salt, quicklime, and, unusually, blessed water provided by the pastor of the local Baptist church. Today, nearly a century after the events at the Holloway Hotel, the site remains undeveloped. Local ordinances prohibit excavation deeper than 6 feet in the area. A small marker erected by the Historical Society in 1969 simply identifies the location as the former site of a hotel, with no mention of its dark history. Blackwater Creek continues to flow nearby, and during heavy rains, the foundation stones of the old hotel are sometimes visible when erosion removes the covering soil. What remains unclear, and perhaps will always remain so, is the true nature of what Thomas Holloway referred to as the well. His journal suggests he discovered something beneath the hotel, something that could dispose of bodies so completely that no evidence remained. The forensic analysis from 1964 confirmed the presence of unusual chemical compounds, but could not identify their origin. The mechanisms he installed to deliver victims to this entity or substance operated with calculated efficiency, allowing him to commit murders for financial gain without detection. Some researchers have suggested that Holloway may have discovered a natural geological feature, perhaps a sinkhole, containing a rare combination of microorganisms and minerals that accelerated decomposition. Professor James Thornton, a geologist who briefly examined the site in 1966, proposed that certain limestone formations in the Ozarks contain unusual bacterial communities capable of breaking down organic material at accelerated rates. These communities typically develop in isolated subterranean environments with unique chemical compositions. What Holloway described as the well may have been such a formation, though his descriptions suggest properties beyond those documented in current scientific literature. Others propose more mundane explanations, that Holloway simply used powerful acids or other chemicals to dispose of his victims, and the journal's more cryptic references were attempts to obscure his methodology or manifestations of guilt-induced delusions. Dr. Paul. Catherine Mills, a forensic psychologist who reviewed the case in 1972, suggested that Holloway's journal exhibits classic patterns of psychological distancing and mystification often observed in serial killers who develop elaborate justifications for their actions. The references to the well as a sentient entity may represent externalization of his own murderous impulses, allowing him to perceive himself as merely serving the well's hunger rather than acting on his own volition. What these theories fail to explain are the sounds reported by multiple witnesses, the scratching noises from below, and eventually, if Mary Ellis and Margaret Holloway are to be believed, something that resembled words. They also fail to account for Joseph Keene's extreme reaction to whatever he encountered in the well shaft in 1968, decades after the last victim would have been consigned to its depths. Perhaps most disturbing is a detail found in the final pages of Mitchell's investigation, filed separately and restricted to senior personnel. A recording device lowered into the tertiary shaft in July 1964 captured approximately 8 minutes of audio before failing. Analysis revealed only ambient sounds for the first 7 minutes: water dripping, settling earth, the distant rumble of groundwater. In the final minute, however, technicians isolated a sound described as rhythmic scraping, interspersed with vocalization-like elements that suggest articulated speech, though no words could be definitively identified. The recording was scheduled for more sophisticated analysis at a federal facility in September 1964, but transportation records indicate the tape never arrived. All copies were reportedly destroyed in a small fire at the evidence storage facility in October 1964. Detective Mitchell requested reopening the investigation in 1965, but was denied. He took early retirement the following year and moved to Arizona, where he died in 1972. His personal papers, donated to the state archives by his daughter, contain a single reference to the Holloway case. Some investigations are best left incomplete. Some answers would only replace mystery with madness. A journal entry from Mitchell's personal diary dated August 17, 1964, but not included in official records, reads, "The techs finally cleaned up that recording from the shaft, removed the background noise, amplified the vocal elements. I wish they hadn't. What we're hearing isn't random sound. It's voices, multiple voices speaking in unison, with occasional individual voices emerging briefly before submerging back into the collective. The words are English, though distorted as if spoken through liquid. The phrases repeat, feed us, join us, find us." Most disturbing is the final segment, where a child's voice clearly separates from the others, calling what sounds like, "Mommy, I'm still here. We're all still here. I've ordered all copies destroyed." Some things shouldn't be preserved, even as evidence. The Holloway Hotel has faded from local memory. The site now an unremarkable wooded lot surrounded by chain-link fencing. Few residents know the story, and fewer still give it credence. But occasionally, usually after heavy rains when the water table rises, hikers near the old foundation report unusual sounds: a liquid churning, a metallic scraping, and sometimes, just at the edge of hearing, what might be words. A park ranger interviewed in 1966 described his experience. "I was checking the boundary markers after the spring floods and found myself near the old hotel site. It was getting dark, but I know the area well enough. Then I heard it, like someone dragging metal across stone, but with a rhythm to it. Then something else, like whispering, but not quite. Not in English, but not like any foreign language I've heard either. Something about it made the hair on my neck stand up. I've been in these woods all my life and never felt fear like that. I left immediately and haven't been back at sunset since." The ranger's account continues with details not included in official reports. "The strangest part wasn't the sound itself, but how it affected me physically. As I listened, I felt a pulling sensation, like something was tugging gently at my insides, drawing me toward the old foundation. My thoughts became foggy, replaced with images I'd never seen. A hotel room with a bed against the wall, a dining room with people I didn't recognize, a man with a mustache operating some kind of mechanism beneath a desk. These weren't like normal thoughts or memories. They pushed into my mind from outside, vivid and forceful. I found myself walking toward the foundation without consciously deciding to. I'd gone nearly 30 yards before I realized what was happening and forced myself to turn away. As I did, the images faded, replaced by a single thought that didn't feel like my own. We are so hungry. The most recent documented incident occurred in August 1967, when 2 geology students from the University of Arkansas were conducting soil surveys in the area. Their field recordings, preserved in the university archives but rarely accessed, contained 2 minutes of what the students labeled unidentified subterranean acoustics. In the background of these recordings, barely audible beneath the students' technical discussion, something rises from the earth, a sound that might be water or wind or shifting stone, but resolved through digital enhancement, carries an unmistakable cadence of speech. Phonetic analysis conducted by linguistics professor Dr. Robert Chambers identified patterns consistent with language, though matching no known human tongue. His report, never published but included in the university's restricted collection, notes, "The vocalizations exhibit syntactic structure and phonemic consistency suggestive of linguistic communication, but employ sound combinations physiologically impossible for the human vocal apparatus." One of the students, Martin Coleman, later provided additional context in a letter to the Historical Society. What the recording doesn't capture is the visual phenomenon we observed. As we conducted our survey near the old foundation, we noticed an unusual discoloration in the soil, a darkening that seemed to spread outward from the foundation stones like liquid seeping through cloth. The discoloration moved against the gradient of the slope, which is physically impossible for normal fluid dynamics. As it approached our equipment, we observed a localized temperature drop of approximately 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Most disturbing was the behavior of insects in the affected soil. They appeared to organize in patterns resembling alphabetic characters, forming and reforming in sequences that almost, but not quite, constituted recognizable words. When we attempted to photograph this phenomenon, all 3 cameras malfunctioned simultaneously. The discoloration receded as abruptly as it had appeared when another hiker approached from the trail, calling a greeting. We chose not to include these observations in our formal report as they defied scientific explanation and would likely have undermined the credibility of our geological findings. What speaks beneath the ruins of the Holloway Hotel? What waits in the darkness of a well that feeds on human lives? Perhaps it is merely the wind through hidden caverns or water rushing through the remains of Holloway's pipes. Perhaps it is nothing more than the imagination giving voice to the echoes of past horrors. Or perhaps, as Thomas Holloway discovered to his eventual horror, what he found beneath his hotel was never merely a disposal system. Perhaps what he called the well had accepted his offerings for its own purposes. Perhaps it still waits, patient and hungry, beneath the sealed concrete and fallen timbers of a hotel long reduced to foundation stones and fading memories. The investigation files remain in the Newton County Archives, accessible by special permission, but rarely requested. The land remains undeveloped, protected by ordinances whose original purpose few remember. And deep below, something may still be digesting its last meal, a meal of 27 souls delivered by a desperate hotel owner who discovered too late that some hungers, once fed, only grow stronger. In the decades since, several attempts to develop the land have failed for various reasons: financial complications, permit denials, unexpected equipment failures. Local residents speak of bad luck associated with the property, without knowing its history. Only a few elderly citizens remember the stories their grandparents told of the Holloway Hotel and the guests who checked in but never checked out. The report concludes with a recommendation against future construction, citing unstable subterranean conditions of indeterminate origin. The geologist who authored the report later refused to elaborate when contacted by local historians, saying only that some places in this world are best left alone. An addendum to the report, not included in public records but discovered during the Historical Society's research, contains this passage. Soil samples from the foundation area exhibit anomalous properties inconsistent with the surrounding geology. The last official document relating to the site is a geological survey from 1969, which noted unusual subsidence patterns in the soil surrounding the old foundation. Most notable is the presence of an unidentified organic compound that appears to modify the structural integrity of surrounding materials. In laboratory tests, this compound demonstrated the ability to permeate seemingly impermeable substances, including concrete and certain metals. Most concerning is its apparent response to proximity with living tissue. When a sample was placed near a laboratory mouse, the compound oriented toward the animal and displayed increased molecular activity. The implications of these properties for long-term containment are troubling. Conventional barriers may prove inadequate if the substance maintains these characteristics over time. Today, Blackwater Creek still flows past the overgrown lot where the Holloway Hotel once stood. Trees have reclaimed much of the area, their roots slowly displacing the foundation stones, but nothing grows directly above where the well shafts were sealed. 3 barren circles, and otherwise lush vegetation, as if the earth itself rejects what lies beneath. And sometimes, if you stand at the edge of the property on a quiet night when the wind is still and the creek runs low, you might hear it, a sound from deep below, not quite scratching anymore, not quite whispering. Something in between, something waiting, something that remembers the taste of those who once fed it and hungers still. The most recent report from a hiker who strayed from the main trail in June 1968 describes finding a perfect circle of dead vegetation about 15 feet in diameter, centered on what looked like an old foundation stone. In the middle was a small pool of something that resembled water but moved wrong, too thick, too deliberate in its motions. As I watched, it seemed to form patterns, almost like handwriting. I took a step closer to see better, and that's when I heard the voices, not out loud but in my head. They knew my name. They knew things about me no stranger could know. They promised to show me something wonderful if I would just come a little closer, just reach out and touch the surface of that pool. I was actually extending my hand when my dog began barking frantically, breaking whatever hold those thoughts had on me. As I turned to leave, I felt something like fingers brush against the back of my neck, cold, wet, but somehow solid. I ran all the way back to the main road. My dog refused to come home with me, ran off into the woods, and never returned. Sometimes I think she knew something I didn't, something about what might have followed me home if she hadn't distracted it. The land remains undeveloped to this day, a quiet testament to horrors largely forgotten. The well continues its patient vigil beneath the earth, occasionally reaching out to remind the living of its presence. And Thomas Holloway's desperate scheme to save his financial future lives on as a warning that some bargains extract costs far beyond their apparent price, and some hungers once awakened can never truly be satisfied.